Hello, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to unpack a story that is honestly just as chaotic as it is completely fascinating. You know, the very existence of England is so often overshadowed by the broader history of Great Britain and the UK. But for those modern unions to even exist, England had to be forged first. And actually, it's been a unified entity since 927 AD, but it absolutely wasn't born overnight. Looking at this through the eyes of a medieval historian, I can tell you for sure that this nation was forged through a violently unpredictable, absolute tug of war. The existence of England is often taken for granted. But who actually claimed this land first? I mean, we look at a map today and we just kind of assume those borders have always been there, right? But modern nations are built on incredibly shaky, often violent foundations. Okay, let's dive into this with a roadmap. We're going to track this violent tug of war across 6 distinct eras: the Anglo-Saxon arrival, the shock of the Vikings, the Anglo-Saxon counterattack, the first English king, the Viking resurgence, and finally, peace and true unification. Let's get right into it. Part 1, the Anglo-Saxon arrival, filling the Roman power vacuum. To really understand how England began, we have to look at what was left behind. Imagine the mighty Roman Empire just packing up and fading away in the 400s AD. That left a massive power vacuum, and the native Britons were left incredibly vulnerable. Almost immediately, they came under heavy attack from nearby Picts and Scots. So, in a desperate move, they invited Anglo-Saxon Germanic tribes over as mercenaries, hoping these fierce warriors would push out the invaders. And well, they did. But then, the Germanic tribes turned right around, attacked the native Britons who originally invited them, and seized total authority by the 7th century. Now, the Anglo-Saxons didn't just create one unified, happy country. Instead, they completely fractured the mainland into 7 distinct kingdoms. It was like a giant puzzle. You had Essex, Kent, Sussex, Mercia, East Anglia, Northumbria, and Wessex. For a few centuries, this heavily divided map was the status quo, but it wouldn't last. The next great wave of invaders was already brewing on the horizon. Part 2, the shock of the Vikings, a sacred stunner. Over time, the Anglo-Saxon rulers had grown somewhat accustomed to their fractured balance of power. But then in 793 AD, a Viking army landed at the Lindisfarne Monastery. And they didn't just attack a military fort, they violently raided a sacred building. Their sudden arrival, combined with an absolute blatant disrespect for this holy site, deeply stunned the Anglo-Saxon rulers. I mean, they were just completely unprepared for the sheer brutality these Vikings were bringing to their shore. And this brilliantly illustrates the aftermath. The map changed with relentless speed. Danish invaders seized East Anglia by the end of 870, Mercia fell just 4 years later, and Northumbria was swallowed up by 875. These rapidly shifting power dynamics left Wessex standing completely alone as the only remaining major kingdom under Anglo-Saxon authority, frantically protected by King Alfred. Part 3, the Anglo-Saxon counterattack. From Alfred to Ethelfled. History is almost always an action-reaction narrative, right? Well, here is where the Anglo-Saxons finally planted their feet and began a highly strategic, incredibly bold pushback into occupied territory. King Alfred, fighting tooth and nail to keep Wessex independent, initially tried to just pay off the Viking aggressors. But eventually, he'd had enough. He led his army straight into the Battle of Edington and left the Danes utterly routed. This massive victory definitively secured Wessex's independence. Taking full advantage of the shifting momentum, Alfred even grabbed a newly acquired portion of Mercia, placing an answering nobleman in Ealdorman in charge of it. And Alfred's successors really built on this momentum. Edward the Elder and Ethelfled dramatically increased the pressure on the Danelaw in 917 and 918. They successfully pushed north, absorbing Mercia and East Anglia. They actually squeezed the Viking territories so effectively that by the time Ethelfled extended her territory all the way up to York, the locals simply pledged loyalty to her just to avoid fighting altogether. Part 4, the first English king, Aethelstan's ambition. So we are now in the 920s, and thanks to the conquests of his predecessors, Edward's son Aethelstan inherits a realm where the concept of a truly unified England is finally starting to take a recognizable shape. Now, Aethelstan was an absolute opportunist. When his sister's husband, the local Viking ruler of Northumbria, Sitric, passed away, Aethelstan didn't hesitate. He immediately marched on York. He swiftly consolidated Northumbria as a part of his own kingdom. By seizing this very specific opportunity, he actually termed himself the King of the English. In fact, this precise moment in 927 AD is the moment most historians point to as the official creation of the Kingdom of England. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the situation was not exactly so simple. It is so easy to think that once a king declares a kingdom, the borders are just permanently settled. But in medieval history, come on, nothing is ever permanently settled. Because Athelstan wasn't done, in 937, he ambitiously launched an invasion into Scotland, which was known then as Alba. This provoked a massive, terrifying alliance against the English invaders. We're talking Constantine II, King of Alba, Olaf Guthfrithson, King of Dublin, and Owen, King of Strathclyde. They all clashed at the spectacular Battle of Brunanburg. The casualties on both sides were disastrously high. But against all odds, the English severely crushed this massive alliance, stirring up a totally new, powerful sense of nationalism and pride. Part 5. The Viking Resurgence. Exploiting the Power Vacuum. Now, here's the catch. When a young kingdom is held together entirely by the sheer force of a single king's ambition, his death creates immense weakness. Right after Ethelstan's death in 939, the Vikings immediately exploited that moment. The previously defeated Viking king of Dublin, Olaf, swooped back in to violently reclaim those northern lands. Viking aggression rapidly captured York, plus a large chunk of Mercia and Northumbria. Meanwhile, English instability really set in. Ethelstan's half-brother, King Edmund, took over a deeply unstable realm and was literally strong-armed into accepting this massive annexation of his own territory. Track this chaotic timeline with me, because the whiplash is very real. In 941, King Olaf dies. By 944, Edmund pays the Vikings back by entirely pushing them out of Northumbria, essentially reuniting England. But then, just 2 years later, in 946, Edmund is mysteriously murdered, and barely a year after that, in 947, Eric Bloodaxe of Norway attacks and seizes Northumbria all over again. The kingdom's stability was incredibly short-lived, plunging the whole region into a dizzying decade of violent conflicts over who actually controlled the Isles. Part 6. Peace and True Unification. The Reign of Edgar the Peaceful. So, after all that blood and betrayal, the violent tug-of-war finally truly settles into stability. How did Edgar do it? Well, not just through warfare, but through brilliant integration. Following the death of his brother, Edgar took over the whole of England. And instead of endless warring, he passed vast, foundational reforms to actually organize the state. Critically, he actively upheld a huge number of the existing Danelaw systems and laws. He deliberately respected both Anglo-Saxon and Danish cultures, appeasing the Danish portion of the population rather than fighting them. So the crucial point is that Edgar maintained this incredible balancing act built on 3 pillars: peace, unity, and order. For nearly 2 decades, he sustained this peace. It was only here, under his incredibly well-managed rule, that the true foundational laws and structural systems of the nation of England were finally and permanently solidified. When we step back and look at the whole picture, the formation of England was exactly this: a crucible of conquering, being conquered, and reconquering. It wasn't a neat, straight line. Modern-day England was forged through a highly non-linear, incredibly chaotic process that required both the fierce defense of the Anglo-Saxons and the relentless pressure of the Vikings to finally define its borders and its laws. England was finally united, with its foundational laws set by Edgar the Peaceful. But looking at the wild ride of medieval history, we have to ask, how long can peace truly last? History is never actually finished. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this leaves you eager to dive even deeper into the incredible twists and turns of our past.